So what is cost segregation? Cost segregation is basically accelerating your depreciation on your property. What a CPA will typically do is a 39-year straight line depreciation for most property types. For residential properties, it's 27 and a half. And by going through and accelerating your depreciation into the first year or earlier years, what that does is front end loads a lot of those depreciation costs that you can then use to offset your income and thereby reduce your federal taxes. So this is going to be kind of a high level of discussion today. There's a lot of nitty gritty on this, and some of these topics alone could take an hour or two to go through. So you can see on the screen some of the topics we're going to talk about today: bonus depreciation and things of that nature. I kind of alluded to a lot of these factors that are on here before. About the 27 and a half years, again, that's for residential, 39 for most other property, all other property types. And what you really need to do is to have a depreciation specialist on your staff, or a consultant that you can work with, who will be able to advise you on not just the acquisition, how you can reduce your taxes, but also, let's say you're doing a lot of CapEx renovations and things of that nature. What we can do is provide guidance on how you can save money on those as well. You can see down there, the bottom point is about invoices. Are they deductible? Are they going to be repairs? Are they going to be improvements? And there's a lot, as you can imagine, with the taxes, there's a lot of different factors. There was the CARES Act, which expired this past year. There's a Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017, tangible property regulations and things of that nature. The 2020 CARES Act, the reason why there's red lines through the other ones is because that expired with tax year 2020. But there was a technical glitch that was fixed with the QIP, Qualified Improvement Property. Even though it's not available right now, I will still mention something about the CARES Act, the net operating loss carryback, and how I was able to help a client with that this past year. With the CARES Act, there was a provision that allowed owners who own property to actually receive refunds from all the IRS taxes they paid over the last 5 years. Think about that. All the taxes that you had paid over the last 5 years, you have to get a refund on. Now, one of my clients who owns some hotels, his CPA had not done cost segregation on them. And we did those studies. And he received hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes that he had paid in the previous years, which is huge. And the reason why I bring that up, and even though it's not applicable anymore because it expired with tax year 2020, is as an example of that was a situation where if he had not done that, it would have expired and would have lost that forever. So one of the things that we've done over the last 18 years is stay on top of all the different tax rules and regulations so that we can provide guidance to our clients regarding what is out there right now. So today, we're not going to make you necessarily a depreciation expert on everything, but just hopefully that this provides some guidance for you that will really help you through not just your own investments, but then also some of your friends who are and colleagues who are involved with that as well. And as a good rule of thumb, the return that we get for these studies is about $30,000 to $80,000 per $1 million in property. So if you have $1 million property, one of the first things you need to do is subtract out what the land value is, because you can't depreciate the land. So if you have $1 million in property, and this has to do with not what the appraised value is, but what you acquired it for, what your basis is in that property. And the reason why there's such a range, we say it's 30,000 to 80,000. Why is it so much? Well, think about the different properties that are out there. And because I deal with all property types, I get to see the results of a lot of different ones. And if let's say you have like an industrial building where you have mostly a warehouse, distribution, manufacturing, things of that nature, because of that type of property, it's not going to have as many components within that as opposed like a medical facility or a hotel or office or multifamily. So that's why there's quite a range in the different ones. So it's not based on per dollar or even per square foot. Now, I'm sure that those of you who own a house, when you comes time to do your IRS taxes, there's certain deductions that you're going to take. If you have interest that you owe on the mortgage, you're going to take that. If you have property taxes, you're going to take that. There's different things which are in the IRS tax code that it's there for you to use. And it's the same thing with commercial property, and the same thing with cost segregation. You know, it's not a tax loophole. We've done tens of thousands of studies. We've never had a study overturned. We will at no cost defend the study in case a client ever gets audited by the IRS. So it's not a loophole. It's in the IRS tax code, and it's something that you should take advantage of if you can. Now, I'll mention one thing. There's some situations where it's not advantageous, and that's say you buy something and you're planning on selling it within the next year or two. There's something called a recapture tax, so it may not make that advantageous to do it. But if you're planning on keeping something for, we say 5 years or 3 to 5 years, depending upon what ROI you're going to get on that money, it's probably money well spent. So even though you might have a little bit of a recapture in 3, 4, 5 years, it's still advantageous to do. 5 years after that, it's really not much of an issue. But again, not a loophole. Okay, let's take a look at the straight line method. A good analogy for this would be a hamburger. Hamburger, $3.99, straight line method. Now, I don't know if there's anybody here who's old enough to remember what the cost segregation method would be for a hamburger. Can anybody remember this commercial, or are you all too, you don't remember that? This was something that you remember, there you go. You want to sing that for us, Wayne? All right, good job. Yeah, we do that presentation, and the millennials and Gen Xers and everybody are looking around like, what are you talking about? But anyway, it was something that was very popular decades ago, and it's a good analogy because think about it this way: you have a hamburger as one entity, and what the cost segregation does is it takes that hamburger or that property and it breaks it up into pieces and parts that you can then depreciate on a faster basis. Okay, makes sense? So a lot of this is kind of a repetition of what I mentioned before about the $38,000, but the one bullet point on there talks about how effective it is. What's the threshold for dollar amounts that works? We typically say if you have a building which is $350,000 or greater. Now, again, you need to exclude the land because you can't depreciate the land. And also for tenant improvements, or if you say you're doing a CapEx on a multifamily of a couple $100,000, we can do an analysis on that as well. And your return on investment is typically in the 10 to 30 times. So whatever amount of the study, that's how much you're going to be saving in taxes. I've had some situations where it's lower than that. I'll tell you one I'm doing in Connecticut right now, where they acquired the property about 5 years ago and didn't take advantage of cost segregation. I'm not sure why, but the CPA didn't recommend it. So because some of the components have already been depreciated with the straight line method, so it's kind of taking a little bit of the cream off the top. So in that particular instance, you're not going to have as great an ROI on that. However, you know, we can still make the numbers work depending on the property. If it's a large enough cost basis, even though a client has owned it for maybe 5, 10, 15 years, we can still make the numbers work. And I'll get into this a little bit later too, but the way the process works is that we provide a no-cost preliminary analysis for any property nationwide. So based on the tens of thousands of studies we've done, we ask some preliminary information about the property. And then based on that information, we're able to go ahead and provide you with a very conservative estimate of what your cost savings is going to be, and then what the flat fee cost of the study is going to be. It's not percentage based. And in over 90% of the time, when clients move forward and get one of those studies, the savings are greater than what we estimate, because we're very conservative, under promise, and we deliver on that. So let's talk a little bit about bonus depreciation. Anybody here heard about bonus depreciation? No? Yes? A couple? Okay. Bonus depreciation, the way that works is it came as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act for new acquisitions. And you can see there in red, it talks about what's eligible for bonus depreciation. And those would be components that would have a life of less than 20 years. So you can see the 5 and 7 year bucket, the 15 and the 15 there in the lower right with different parts of it. And think about this as well. There's going to be certain elements of a property which you're not going to be able to appreciate faster. It's going to be the structural elements of the property. And a couple slides here later is going to go ahead and show you what those are. Anybody remember what the difference is between the 39 and the 27.5 up there in the top with the buckets? I went over it.
Oh, that's commercial and residential.
Right. Yeah, the 39 years for most property types is 27.5 years, what the straight line is for residential. And what this will show is I'm not going to go through all of the line items on here, but you can see some of the componentry, which is going to be the real property in the left-hand column. And those are the ones which are going to continue to have the straight line, and then some of the others buckets with the 5 to 7 and the 15 year. And then with bonus depreciation, what you're able to do is actually front-end load those appreciation costs into the first year, which is huge. Some more information regarding the 5 and 7 year. Okay, I love this chart. Take a look at this. See the blue line there? That is the straight line depreciation. So you can see how over the 27.5 or 39 years, you're going to have a straight line depreciation on the property if you hold it for that period of time. Look at the blue line, excuse me, the green line. That's the 100% bonus depreciation. See that big hockey stick thing there at the front? That is how much you're able to depreciate in the first year. And one thing I'll mention here is because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that came out in 2017, prior to that time, you could just do the bonus depreciation on new construction. But with that act, you're actually able to do it with acquisitions as well. And I'll give you an example of one. I was working with a hotel client here recently, met with them and their CPA. Went over the preliminary analysis, and the CPA is saying, well, why are you doing bonus depreciation? That's not applicable because he just bought this. I said, well, you're right. A couple of years ago, that was the case, but now you're able to take advantage of the bonus depreciation. Now, here's a CPA, been in business over 30 years, single practitioner. I assume he did a pretty good job for his clients, but wasn't necessarily on top of all the tax rules and regulations. So that's what our job is, to stay on top of all that and provide guidance for you. So if you're working with a CPA and they might, just keep in mind, they may or may not be giving you the correct advice. So what are the different types of buildings that qualify for cost segregation? Well, you can see there are all these different ones. And one I like to talk about too, it's not listed here, is a golf course. Now, didn't I say earlier that you can't depreciate land? So why do you think you'd be able to, why would a golf course be a good candidate? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, Mike? Pardon me? Because of maybe like the clubhouse and the landscaping, the parking lot, there's a whole lot of other elements within that can be depreciated. So what I say is basically, it works all the time for everything. Again, not a good fit if you're planning on doing a quick flip on something, but if you're looking for a 3 to 5 year hold or longer, you're leaving money on the table. It's kind of like, again, you're doing your personal taxes, you're not taking deduction for interest on your mortgage or property taxes, you're bad. Okay, that kind of goes over the bonus depreciation that we just discussed. The CARES Act I referenced earlier in regards to some technical glitch. I won't bore you with all that wonky stuff. So how's that work practically? You're saying you're able to save money on something, but how does that work? Well, think about it this way. If you look at a profit and loss statement, you're going to have different items on there for expenses. And one of the expenses which is on there is called depreciation. Now, depreciation is a non-cash expense, but it acts the same as any other type of an expense as far as reducing your net operating income. So let's say you have a net operating income of $100,000 and there's an additional benefit of depreciation for $100,000. So rather than pay tax or whatever your tax bracket is for $100,000, you're not paying any taxes because it brings your income down to zero. Does that make sense? See a lot of heads going up and down. Okay. I've done a lot of talking here. Anybody have any questions about anything?
I actually had a question about that.
Okay.
So you can take you can take depreciation against to lower your net operating income on the property. So if someone is syndicating a deal, and it decreases net operating income of the property. Let's say it's a 5-year hold and we're in year 5, and you're looking to sell off that property. Would that technically decrease the value of that property?
You know, that's an excellent question. And Jim Biggs actually asked that question with the presentation we gave with the old Capital one. And from our perspective, we don't see that as being that way. But then it gets into an issue is that, I think the way in which you phrased it, well, is that legal? Is that ethical to do that type of thing? And the answer is yes. It's not like keeping 2 sets of books. It's just that it's an expense, but it's a non-cash expense, and therefore it shouldn't have that impact. But to be fair, one of the things that he asked, and I think what we're probably going to do is have another session just on that itself, because it gets into a lot of detail. But that's an excellent point, and not the first time we've heard it.
I had another question from online. If you invest in a syndication, is the ROI still 30 to 90,000 per 1 million of your own dollars invested?
Yeah, you can repeat the question.
Yeah. You're saying if you're in a syndication, does it have the same impact on the ROI? And then that's a great one. And one of the differentiating factors here is when you're a passive investor versus an active investor who's actively involved in the property, or maybe a real estate professional, there are certain advantages that you can take for that versus a passive investor. For the passive investor who has a W-2, what you can do is you can take the losses against any gains that you have on that specific property. However, with a real estate professional or someone who's actively involved in it, you can actually take those gains and then spread it around maybe some of your other properties and things of that nature. So people will say, oh, well, I'm just going to check the box for real estate professional. Not a good idea. There's certain rules and regulations for that. It's pretty hard to have a W-2 and work an additional 750 hours or more to become technically involved as a real estate professional. It's one of those red flags. The IRS, when they see that, you're going to get audited, and you're not going to win. So I wouldn't advise that. Anything else?
Is bonus depreciation still allowed, or is that no longer allowed after 2020?
It's still allowed. There is a declining balance in the years going forward, but for 2020 and 2021, it's still allowed 100%. Yeah, Mike?
Can you talk about,
The questions as far as recapture and the timeline in regards to that, it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier, and that is if you're going to be, and I actually have a PDF which kind of explains all this in a couple pages. And it is advantageous to do it if you're going to have a 5-year hold, because there's certain things such as carpeting and things of that nature, which are going to be, depreciated, and you can have a lower basis as a result of that. So, and then other, because it's really kind of a personal issue as well, as far as what type of ROI are you going to get on that money. Because if you're only going to be getting a 2 to 3% on it, then that's a huge difference, as opposed to if you're getting, 15, 20% or more, that could have an impact on it. Because again, there's some clients who will say, I know that I'm going to sell it in 2 to 3 years, but it's still advantageous for me to go ahead and do this because I will pay that recapture tax, because I know the ROI I'm going to get on the money I'm going to save is going to far outweigh what it is I'm going to have to pay. The question is whether we look at that up front. And on the initial questionnaire that we have, one of the questions that we have is, are you planning on selling the property within 5 years? And if they say that they are, then I will have a further conversation with them, because our objective is not to be able to sell studies and do studies for clients if it's not going to be advantageous for them financially. So we ask that question up front. And, if they say, oh, yeah, I'm just doing a quick flip on this, I'm going to be selling it in a year or two, we'll say, you know what, it's probably not a good idea for you to do that. So we try to pre-qualify that for every client initially. Yes.
So for a long time, like that, company, how far back can you go? 20-year owner.
The question is, let's say there's a client who has owned a commercial property or residential property for 10, 15, 20 years. It's advantageous for them to do it. And the answer is maybe. What we need to do is to get information regarding their particular situation. I just can't stand here and say, well, yes, it is advantageous. Because let's say the property is only $500,000, then it probably isn't. If it's something which is $20 million, then yeah, the answer probably is. And then also, what is the property type? Is it something that has a lot of componentry that can be depreciated, or one that can't? So I can't give you a hard answer on that. It's really going to depend. But that's the nice thing about our system is we get that information. We'll get a copy of the latest depreciation schedule. And based on all that information, we'll come back with a predictive analysis of what your savings will be to see whether or not it is advantageous to move forward or not. I showed you before how the ROI can be 10 to 30 times. Well, in a situation like that, maybe it's 5. But the question is, would you spend 5,000 to get 25? You're still ahead 20 grand, but it's not a high ROI.
Well, what kind of
The question is, what do we look at when we are analyzing whether or not a client is a prospective, who's a good candidate or not? We'll take a look at the address of the property, how much it was acquired at, minus the land value. What's the property type? Is it multifamily? Is it industrial, office, etc.? What's the square footage? What's the acreage? How many parking spots do they have? What's the tax rate? Sometimes it's a blended tax rate because maybe it's a syndication. There's a number of different people, so we take a look at the average. Is it a 1031 exchange? 1031 exchange brings a whole new element to it. And I've done 10 clients with 1031 exchanges and it works great. However, for that, we need to take a look at what is the property that they sold and take a look at the depreciation on that one. And so that's all part of that analysis. Answer the question? Yes, sir.
So piggyback on this question. Everything works for a person to do it. You can go back 10, 20 years on a property.
Potentially. The question is whether or not a client has owned something for 10 or 20 years, can they still do cost segregation? And the answer is maybe. There's so many variables, I just can't say yes or no.
Well, I understand, I just wanted to know, it is possible to go back that far, if the numbers work.
Yes, it is possible to go back that far if the numbers work. And that's why we provide a no-cost preliminary analysis for you to take a look at that and what's the conservative estimate of what you're going to save and what's the cost of the study, which again is a flat fee. It's not percentage based. So you can then make a determination, is this a good business decision for us or not?
That's a flat fee across all types of shapes properties, or flat fee per.
Question is whether the flat fee is the same for all properties or is it individualized? And the answer is it's going to be individual. Let's say it's a duplex, which is $500,000, or let's say I've done some which are in the many millions of dollars. It's going to be a lot different because it's going to take a lot more work for the analyst to go through and analyze each one. And we do a site visit on every property, and they'll zoom in on every little item. This is what the model number is of this security camera. It's very detailed, which is why it takes 4 to 6 weeks to do. Anything else? Okay, moving ahead. These are a couple examples of some sample studies that we've done. Self-storage, apartment building, dental office, and office complexes. And again, you can see what we've done here is we have a column, first year cash flow from tax savings, but then what it is with bonus depreciation. For instance, you can see on the first item there, the funeral home, prior to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act for bonus depreciation, the savings on that was just less than 20 grand. Whereas with the bonus, it's up to 37. So that's a huge difference. And that works for all the different property types. Isn't that an ugly building? One of the reasons why the numbers on this were so huge, because take a look at it, the cost basis of it was about 1.8. And look down at the bottom there, how much was eligible for bonus depreciation? Almost 900,000. Now, this is not the norm. But one thing you don't see here is all the parking area that they had for all the trucks that were parking on this spot, all the many spaces for that. So a lot of money can be allocated for that. So look at that. This particular one, it had a fee of $5,800, and look what the benefit was. Is that a good deal?
Oh, yeah.
This will give you a little bit of an idea. I know the lettering is kind of small here, but these are some of the different items that are part of the analysis that we do. I'll just read a couple of them here with the millwork and molding and vinyl tile and all those different elements. Like I mentioned, it's such an incredibly detailed analysis that takes many weeks to complete. I kind of went through this a little bit as far as talking about what are the advantages of engineer-based study. Now, one thing to watch out for if you're having someone do a cost segregation study is ask the question, is this an engineering-based study? That's the gold standard. There's different levels of cost segregation. And there's some of them, I've heard some clients that say, well, I got this price. I said, well, does that include a site visit? And they said, well, no. I said, well, that's not going to stand up to any type of an audit, IRS audit. We literally will not do a study unless there's a site visit. Because one of the things that we do is we will guarantee that, or I should say that we will defend that study in case the client ever does get audited. If there's no site visit, there's not hundreds of photographs, if there's not all that detail, what's there to defend? So if you're doing it, make sure that it's an engineered based study, do a site visit, so you can sleep at night knowing that there's not going to be any negative consequences of doing it. So again, you can see there documentation, hundreds of photographs. We'll take a look at aerial photography. We'll take a look at the appraisal. Look at the OM, the offering memorandum that maybe the broker has for the property, any blueprints if it's available, things like that. Are there any questions online or no? Okay. So what are good prospects? I know that previously I mentioned 350. This one shows 250. We have an example where, let's say someone has a single family home as a resident that they're renting out. Those are an example of ones we could probably go down to 250. Again, it gets to the issue of there has to be a cost for the study and what's the benefits going to be and what's the ROI. And the lower you get in cost, the harder it is to make the numbers work, or rationalization for the client to move forward. And then one of the other questions you had was regarding, how do we pre-qualify clients? And one of the things we'll ask them too is, if you were to get a large benefit, is this something you could take advantage of? Let's say the client that already has a huge negative loss that they have to work off. Well, what good is it going to do to have another $500,000 in losses if you can't use it? So that's the other pre-qualifying question that we have. So I alluded to this earlier as far as the predictive analysis, different information we looked at as far as what's the building type, when it was put into service, depreciation, address, tax rate, and all that type of thing. Again, that's something that we provide at no cost for the clients. When they provide that information to me, I take a look at it, make sure everything is filled out properly, and then I'll send it to our corporate office. And then within 2 business days, typically we'll come back with a response that I then go over with the client and show them not just what the savings is going to be, what the cost is going to be, and then we also have a very busy chart which shows the net present value calculations. That'll put you to sleep, but not the numbers. The numbers are very, very favorable. And another thing to keep in mind too is that the cost of the study is tax deductible. So when you look at your return on investment, you take a look at what is going to be the cost after tax, and then take a look at the benefits. And then so I usually go over with the clients, like I did one here for a client in Wisconsin here recently, that, okay, you're going to get X amount of return in those 2 particular situations. And so I like to be able to show them all that information. 1031s, I talked about this earlier. It works great. Just takes a little bit longer to take a look at, analyze it, take a look at the depreciation schedule. This again alludes to what you can do for new and newly acquired buildings. It really is advantageous to do it when you first acquire a property. And you're leaving money on the table by not doing it. One thing you'll see here too, and actually this is on our initial form too, is if the client has owned a building for more than 1 tax season, let's say right now they acquired it in 2020 or earlier, that means there's a straight line depreciation done on that property prior to that time. So what you need to do is have something which is called a 3115 form, which provides information to the IRS that I used to do a straight line depreciation, but now I'm doing accelerated depreciation. So it's quite an extensive form and a lot of information that needs to be filled out there. We will do fill out or provide that information for the CPA. If they want it, there's a slight charge for that. Again, wish it hadn't gone away, that carry back for 5 years. I'm still thinking about that hotel client and all the money he got back which was huge, but that's gone right now. But what you can do is be rest assured that with all the tax experts we have in-house, that we stay on top of all the new tax rules and regulations to make sure that you can take advantage of all those things. Another thing to take into consideration is when you're doing renovations, you're doing CapEx projects, is to keep track of a lot of the componentry that you're going to be throwing away, because a lot of that can be depreciated. We'll do separate partial asset dispositions on those. Also, there's savings that can be used for LED light retrofits. And just need to know that some of these savings are not applicable for residential or properties. Some of them are just for others. So that's why we need to have that initial information about what is the property, so we can make sure we give you the correct guidance on that. There's also another reason why you want to make sure that your cost segregation provider has a good understanding of 179 rules and repairs and things of that nature, because when you're doing those type of renovations on especially larger properties, there's certain ways in which you can capitalize versus expense it. And we can't get in all the particular nitty gritty on that right now, but just keep in mind that there are ways in which if you don't necessarily have to go ahead and exchange, let's say, a bunch of HVAC units or something all at one time, there's ways in which it can be done in shorter time periods, which will then you're able to expense versus capitalize and thereby reduce your tax liability as well. Someone's like the CARES Act, that's again no longer applicable. Here's another example of a self-storage unit. Look at the difference there. Straight line 26,000, bonus depreciation 700. Just amazing difference. I think most of the people here are more in residential, so I'm not going to get too much into the 179. But just to keep it, let you know, we actually have a separate division that's involved with the LED retrofitting, and we're able to do a lot of savings with that. There is a threshold as far as the size of a building that makes it appropriate, not typically about 50,000 square feet or greater. Yeah, Mike. The question is whether 50,000 square feet would be applicable for just one building or the entire thing that you own. And in this particular situation, it would be based on the aggregate, the total of what you have square footage wise, because what we're looking at is what's the fee that's going to be, we're going to have to charge in order to make sure that there's enough savings to make it worthwhile, good ROI on it. So again, we talked about this before as far as the information that's available. So what I like to do is just let you know I'd be happy to be able to provide anybody with a no-cost preliminary analysis for any property nationwide. For those of you that are here in person, I have a copy of a flyer which kind of gives an FAQ for apartment for any of you online or otherwise that would be interested in having it. Me email you a PDF of that, be happy to do that as well, or even those here, if you'd like to have a PDF of it, let me know. Is there a question back there? Or are you just stretching? All right, well, any other questions, April?
Nothing online, let me double check on how.
Anybody else have questions? Feel free.
The 3927 class, I've missed it, so you might need a little detail on what that's all about.
Sure. The question is the difference between a 39-year straight line depreciation and 27.5 years. What the IRS has as guidance is that for most property types, you're going to do a straight line depreciation of 39 years. So every year you take a look at how much you paid for the building, what's the land value, subtract that out, and then you take 1/39 of that and depreciate that over 39 years for most property types. For apartments, for multifamily, that's 27.5 years. The situation's the same. How much did you acquire the property for? What is the land value? You take that off and then you do a straight line of for over 27.5 years. That is, again, if you're doing a straight line depreciation. But with bonus depreciation and a lot of these other things, again, you're leaving money on the table by not doing something like this. If all those other pre-qualifying things that I mentioned make sense for you.
So let's say you do a cost segregation study on your property and it makes sense to go ahead and do so. So let's say you accelerate the depreciation over 5 years. But let's say in year 5, you take a look at the scenario and you realize it makes sense to still continue holding on to this asset. So are you still able to qualify for any other types of depreciation once year 6 kicks in, or have you exhausted all of that depreciation?
The question is, if you acquire a property, initially you think you're going to keep it for 5 years, but then after 5 years, it makes sense that you're going to keep it for a longer period of time. If you're keeping it for a longer period of time, are there any additional depreciation you could take as because you're keeping it for a longer period of time?
You already accelerated.
Yeah, no. And another thing I'll mention too, as far as the initial analysis that we do, when I go over that with the client, when they take a look at it and they decide to move forward, I indicate that there's a flat fee on there. And let's say it's $5,000. What you would then do is pay half of it, or $2,500 upfront. Then we would start the process as far as doing a site visit. Someone would, and again, we have boots on the ground throughout the country. I mean, there's some in the Chicagoland area. If I have time, I'll go and do it myself. But otherwise, that's why I can do them nationwide. And then what happens is when the study is completed, it's typically 4 to 6 weeks. If you're looking at just prior to our tax season, it actually gets into the 8-week time period because we're just very busy. And that's not only applicable for the spring, but also for the fall for tax extension, because of a lot of our clients, not necessarily the ones in syndication, but individual clients who will choose to do an extension on their taxes.
And going back to the HVAC comment that you made, so let's say you purchase a property, the HVAC system still is working perfectly fine, so you have no intention of replacing it up front, but you go ahead and do a cost segregation study on that. So you had mentioned that if you do end up replacing that HVAC system at some point later, it would be considered an expense and not capital.
The question is, if you own a property and it has HVAC and you have no intention of replacing it at the time of acquisition, but then you end up doing that later, can you replace it later? Can it be capitalized or an expense? And the answer is it depends. It depends. There's something called grouping, as far as if you have different buildings which are grouped together, because you might have a complex. It gets kind of complex. So I'm not trying to evade the question. It depends on the situation. Anything else? Well, I'd like to thank all of you very much for this. And let's see, the Bears are losing 14-24 right now in fourth quarter. So You haven't missed anything. Thank you, guys. Pleasure.